Okay, we are going to get started here. All right, so there has been a lot of news this week. So this presentation is almost entirely new. So because there's been a lot happening, and even with everything that has been happening, I probably didn't get all the information in here. So if there's anything that you're hearing about on the news that you feel is not covered in this presentation, you know to feel free to put it in the chat box. So anyhow, let's get started. The changing COVID-19 and the impact on life in general. I am Dr. Valda Crowder. This is my, been practicing emergency medicine now for 30 years, and this is my fourth pandemic. I'm on Twitter at AskDrV and also website AskDrV.us. A lot of the literature and a lot of the original articles that you will see in this presentation will be on the website. So if there's anything that you see and you're kind of like wondering where is that, please go to the website. Just the structure of this will be 10 to 15 minutes of a slide presentation. It may be a little bit longer today because there's been so much that's been happening. Then it'll be followed by a question and answer period. And from beginning to end, it is roughly about an hour. And during the presentation and during the webinar, everyone is in listen mode. Feel free as I'm talking to put any questions that you have in the chat box or also in the Q&A box. We will actually deal with any questions that are written in the chat box or the Q&A box first. Additionally, after this presentation or even when you're invited, you also have the opportunity to send questions. So any questions that we get before or after, those are questions that we handle that are written first. Intention is to keep everyone informed of COVID-19 science to help you and your family stay healthy during this pandemic. The outcome is that you'll leave the webinar motivated to create an action plan and adjust that action plan over time as things occur and new information comes out. Some of you may also be in a position to actually assist with an action plan for your broader community or workplace. All right, so recently this week, we had Brazilian President Bolsonaro tested positive for COVID-19. This picture here on the left is probably the first time we've ever seen him wearing a mask because he has been flaunting that it's nothing, don't worry about it. Now that he's tested positive, he is now wearing a mask. The other person that is tested positive is the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms. I bring her up because it actually shows how this disease actually occurs. Her husband was the one who was kind of sleepy and tired more than usual, which led her to actually go get tested. Her husband is positive, she is positive, and one of her children is positive. So that is the main thing about this disease, is that it often happens in clusters and family clusters. All right, so a couple of things that have come up specifically about COVID-19. We originally talked about COVID-19 being a droplet disease and staying on surfaces, cardboard and plastic surfaces for 24 to 96 hours. We also talked about the fact that it was highly contagious, that the minimum time of exposure to infect others was 45 seconds, and that the percent penetration, like how many people out of 100, if they were exposed to COVID-19, gets it as a high, around 80%, whereas influenza is around 50 or 60%. Now, what has been happening lately is a discussion about whether or not COVID-19 is airborne. So I bring up this slide that we actually had early on in the presentation where COVID-19 was described in the literature as a droplet disease. The difference between an airborne disease and a droplet disease is just the size. So a droplet disease is a disease that's greater than 5 microns, airborne is less than 5 microns. Both of these occur in the air, but it's a matter of how far from the person that's infected do they actually spread. So a droplet disease will only go about 3 feet, where an airborne disease could go very far. So examples of an airborne disease would be like tuberculosis and measles. Examples of a droplet disease would be like Ebola, pertussis, mumps. So now there's conversation about, is COVID-19 airborne? right? Which makes a total difference in how far 6 feet then would not be enough, right? So this just is a description, and it shows in the gray, if something is airborne like measles, that it goes very, very far out, past 6 feet, and can hang in the air for a very, very long time, as opposed to something like Ebola, which is a droplet and will kind of drop in the 3 to 4 feet range, okay? So one of the things that we don't know is COVID-19, a droplet or airborne disease. And what they believe is that there's possibly, it's a droplet disease, but then it actually separates into micro droplets, which are still able to infect someone, and those micro droplets act like an airborne disease. Or does it become aerosolized or airborne by heavy breathing or certain actions? Now, we talked in this presentation about it becoming aerosolized with a nebulizer machine, and specifically not using a nebulizer machine in your home and instead using an inhaler with a spacer. But what they're seeing, and this is, you see, this has not come to print yet. As you see, the date is volume 26, number 8, August 2020. It's not August yet. This is what's going to come to print in the next 2 weeks. They send it out to us in the medical profession, usually about a month early. So basically, this was 112 people in South Korea that actually caught COVID-19 from a fitness dance class. 112 people from a fitness dance class. And so this is part of the literature that's going to come out in August that's actually going to talk about, is this an airborne disease? So the literature seems to be pretty overwhelming that there are certain circumstances where this disease does become airborne. So this is a huge implication for indoor spaces, okay? And the indoor spaces are movies, churches, gyms, office spaces, and also schools. Huge, huge implication if you're now talking about an airborne disease. Completely changes the dynamics of what we're talking about. So a couple of things. Movies are out. Like, you know, because this is all about this, remember, this disease is all about how long you stay in a particular place, right? So if you have contact with the disease and you have contact with the disease for, you know, you went to the grocery store, you were out in 5 minutes, that's different from prolonged contact, like a movie theater where you watch a movie for 2.5 hours. So movie theaters really are going to be out until folks are vaccinated. Church, also out until people are vaccinated. The issue with church is that singing, coughing, instruments, I watched in horror as I watched the Boston Pops play on the 4th of July. So instruments are also something that can aerosolize something that is a droplet. So if you have people playing, I don't know, the tuba or the trombone or the trumpet or whatever, and for the 4th of July, they were actually playing behind the violinist, where if you were going to have them play, you'd have them play in front. But anyhow, but so church is problematic because of the singing, the call and response with the pastor, and any instruments that are windblown. So I would say, keep on going to church by Zoom until there's a vaccine. Another place that I think is problematic, but people are actually attempting to actually make it work, is the gym. So here are some examples of how people are actually, at the bottom here on the left, people are actually working out in sort of enclosed areas, almost enclosed squares. There's sort of panels in between the stationary bicycles. The one extended family member that I have that passed of COVID-19 was somebody who went to the gym regularly, and I do believe that he actually picked up COVID-19 at a gym. So they are making accommodations in these settings, but I would be very wary of them. For myself, at least, I know what I did was I bought a tonal. I bought one of these tonal things where you can kind of, it's kind of like a home gym on the wall. I'm seeing specials for stationary bikes and stationary equipment that you can put in your own home if you have space. Office spaces are also going to be a place where you really shouldn't go and stay any long period of time until this, if it's determined that COVID-19 is airborne. There really is not a way to make an office space, just like an airplane, it's not a way to actually make that safe. Schools. Now again, I'm going to hold out my opinion on schools until the determination of whether or not this is actually airborne or not. These are the accommodations that were made in South Korea for school during the time that they still believed that it was a droplet disease. They also have this similar sort of setup for the lunch table. So everyone kind of has their own little square space at a lunch table. One of the things about schools, which is going to really make a difference, is what is the prevalence of the disease in the community that you're in. That makes a difference on how you actually reopen schools. So we're going to talk about schools for just a little bit. Some considerations or some things to take into consideration about kids going back to school is, number one, what is the infection rate in your community, right? So if you're in a Texas or a Florida or someplace where I think Florida now, 1 in 4 COVID tests are coming back positive. So very, very high rates of positive infection rates. It's impossible to actually go back to school safely until those communities actually bring their COVID infection rates down. So that's number one. Then once those infection rates come down, then you can talk about how do we actually do it. The other thing to consider is what is the age of the children, right? And so if you're dealing with a child that is, 4 or 5 years old, they just may not just maturity-wise be able to social distance and not hug and play with each other, just maturity-wise. So if you have a child that you think is, 7, 8, 9, is somewhat mature, you can spend this time in the summertime actually really training the child on why this is important, here's why we're doing it, and see to what degree the child seems to understand and have compliance with it. As you get above, as you get above, 11, 12 years old, you're more able to actually keep the social, kids are more able to keep the social distancing and actually wear the mask. Again, they still need adult supervision. One of the things that they're doing in a lot of the other countries is they're dramatically decreasing the size of the classrooms by some students coming in earlier in the morning and then leaving earlier, and then other kids coming in like after lunch and staying a little bit later. So that way, some kids are coming, there's not as much overlap of it. The school's almost cut in half, right? So half the school comes in very, very early in the morning, stays till about noon. The other half stays at 1 and maybe leaves it at 4 or 5. So they're doing things like that to kind of make sure that the class sizes are smaller. The other thing to consider is what is the age and condition of the other people living in the home? Is the child living in a home with another adult or child that has a lot of comorbidities? Are they living in a multi-generational family? Are they living in an area where the parents and the grandparents are all living there? Do they have any sick siblings? So these are all things that actually really have to be considered, and whether or not someone is good to go back to school, or not. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about elevators, because there was a case with where someone who was asymptomatic actually actually infected other people in her building with the buttons on the elevators. If you just hold on just a second. So there have specifically, in addition to wearing a mask, best to not have any talking in the elevator, maximum 2 or 3 people in an elevator, depending upon the size of the elevator. And it's also best for people to actually either face forward or face towards the wall. And then obviously the best way is to avoid the elevator completely and actually just take the steps. That's always an option. Now, I just wanted to talk quickly about, and I don't have a full slide on this, but you know, with the airborne disease, there's going to be a lot of talk about positive air pressure and negative air pressure. So one thing is that positive air pressure is where the air moves out of your home. So think about a leaky home that has leaky airs, leaky doorways. Negative pressure at home is where air comes into your home. So think about when you breathe there's negative pressure, right? So you take a deep breath, your diaphragm goes down, and then what happens is air just comes into your lungs, okay? So negative air pressure is actually what you want when you have an airborne disease, because you actually want, if you have an area that you think is going to be infected, like inside of a home or inside a hospital, then you want fresh air to come into it. So you're going to hear a lot of things about negative air pressure when they start talking about what do they have to do if this is determined to be airborne. What do they have to do to ventilation systems to actually get ventilation systems to actually work better in the midst of COVID? Okay, Maramut. Does anybody know why we're talking about the Maramut? Holly? This is what the little critter looks like. Holly, can you hear me?
I had you muted, yes.
Okay. Did anybody know why we have the Maramut in there?
That's fine. Are you looking for hands or chat?
Chat.
Okay, let me check it out. Chat, you recommended that people take the stairs instead of taking, oh, that was a question. No chat, no response.
No response on the Maramut. Okay, all right. Because people asked me about this before this presentation today, and I said, I'm gonna talk about this. All righty, the Maramut is here because the Chinese authorities confirmed bubonic plague in Mongolia. I think it was 2 or 3 cases of the bubonic plague in Mongolia. People have asked me about this. The bubonic plague is what they call Black Death pandemic. It actually was the deadliest pandemic ever. It killed about 50 million people, right? And it's transferred in the fur trade from that little animal there called the Maramut. So the cases in Inner Mongolia are related to eating that Maramut. There hasn't been any community spread, so people don't need to get upset or concerned. At this point, the pandemic alert system worldwide has been activated. Those cases have been contact traced and isolated. There is an antibiotic for bubonic plague. So when it killed 50 million people, that was in the 1300s when there were no antibiotics. So there were some people who called me today like, oh my God, what about this? And I would say, let's focus on COVID. The bubonic plague is interesting that they found a couple cases, but I think we're okay. There's no community spread. If there is, that we have an antibiotics for bubonic plague. I would not be as concerned about that as I am about whether or not COVID is airborne or not. Okay. So one of my main recommendations as a result of this airborne issue is that I think that it's very important for, and I apologize for my dog, I think it's very, very important that we actually, that people upgrade to an N95 mask. And one of the things that I actually wanted to do was just show you real quickly. You can get these on now on eBay for very, very cheap. I apologize for my dog again. These are 5 layers. You get a pack of 10. It looks like for about $13. Pack of 10, $13.99, 20, $17.56. So I would really, really suggest, given that this may be an airborne disease, that people get the N95 or KN95 mask and actually wear these masks. They're 5 layers, and they're going to be much more protected than the regular surgical masks that we have been using. So my recommendation this week is to upgrade the mask. So, all right, I'm going to switch and take the broadcast off and get back to Zoom.
All righty, we have one question ready to go, and now we're entering our question period. So we'll start by taking questions via the chat or the Q&A. Please feel free to include your questions there, and we will take them and answer them. This was I was focused so hard on the presentation, and when you started asking questions, I thought it was rhetorical. Oh my goodness. I didn't know we were moving into interactive parts. So it's very exciting. All right. So first question we have, you recommend that people take the stairs instead of taking elevators. How concerned should we be about the exhaling that people do in staircases, especially given that people breathe more heavily when walking up the stairs?
So I would take the stairs rather than an elevator with an N95 mask. Right. So when you think about it, when you think about stairs, you have a long column, right? So it's more space than an elevator, right? Because you're going to have multiple. You have at least 4 or 5, usually at least 3 or 4 levels, right? So a lot of people don't take the stairs. So people do breathe heavy if they take them, but very few people will actually take the stairs. I would take the stairs any day over an elevator.
Okay, they say thank you. And the next question, I live in San Antonio and have a 13 and 11-year-old with ASD and failure to thrive. If given an option, should I keep them at home?
So so you have 2 children with atrial septal defects. She used ASD, and I want to confirm that she means atrial septal defects.
Okay, let's see what questions. Autism spectrum disorder.
Oh, autism spectrum disorders. Okay. All right. So she wanted to know whether or not she should keep. So that really depends. So I have somebody else who has a child with autism, and the thing with autism is it really depends upon where are they on the spectrum, and how much are they able to socially. Okay, so she says mild. Okay, all right. So if they're mild on the spectrum and they are 10, 11, 12 years old, where they're able to understand wearing a mask and they're able to understand socially distancing, then you would be okay sending them to school. Again, assuming that you're not in an area where there's a huge amount of community. You're not in Texas, Florida, or California, or one of these areas where Georgia, where there's a huge amount of community COVID, and you don't live in a multi-generational house, like you're not at home with grandma. Oh, you're in Texas. Okay. Yeah, no, Texas. Texas is going to be horrendous by September. So what's happening now in Texas, California, and Florida, Georgia, Alabama, the infection rate, and I wanted to include this, but we just didn't get a chance to add this slide. The community spread is so bad, they can no longer use contact tracing. And the reason why they no longer use contact tracing is because there's been that much spread that it's literally impossible to use contact tracing. So for those states, I do not see how they're going to be able to go back to school in September safely.
So, so what does that mean? Because I don't see. I'm also. I mean, the news reports obviously over the last few days have been horrific, but also people are talking about going back to school. I have a nephew who actually goes to school in Dallas. He's in 7th grade. He'll be in 7th grade.
Right.
And they're making plans to go back to school.
Yeah, and I just don't think that it's going to be, I just don't think it's going to be possible. So, you know, just like I showed the article from the CDC that's coming out in August, right? The other thing that I work with a company where they do ordering of medical supplies. California is asking for 3,000 ventilators. And California is not as bad as Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Texas and Florida are both worse than California, right? So if they're asking for 3,000 ventilators now, I do not see how, and they want them within 90 days. I do not see how you can safely go back to school. Like a lot of things, I think that people are kind of pushing these things because they feel like they need to get back to work, right? Now, one thing that you can really do is if you have kids that really need to go back to school, I would look at, what sort of groups can you make amongst their friends, and maybe, one person homeschool one day, I homeschool Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Holly's going to homeschool Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Do you know what I mean? And you can kind of create some spaces so that you can, as parents, actually maybe at least get every other day so that you're actually free from this. But I don't see how in Texas, Florida, and California they're going to be able to go back to school.
My employer posted, wow, let that sit for a second. All right, next question. My employer posted two people per elevator signs, but has removed them. What are the employer's responsibility?
So right now, what's happening is the employers don't have much responsibility at all. There's been over 18,000 complaints to OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Hazard Association, I believe. And 12,000 of them were dismissed without investigation by this administration. So so the OSHA complaints are not being taken and investigated seriously, and the employers are really being given liability protection. The meat packers were given liability protection. Even hospitals and doctors, we were given liability protection. So a lot of industries have been given liability protection. So it's not much. That's probably why you saw it come up and come down. So this is really an environment, which is why we do these webinars. This is an environment where you have to be informed and take matters into your own hands.
So has the liability protection applied to the schools as well? Do they have any liability to protect the children?
I have not, that's interesting. I have not actually heard yet what the liability protection is going to be for the schools. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get some liability protection. But I have not heard yet what that is. But I know meatpacking plants, the hospitals, us as doctors, there's a lot of, and then the OSHA complaints are being completely ignored.
I am very concerned that even though the news has definitely suggested, and I'm not saying as though that's disbelief, but has discussed the surges in all of these places, that it doesn't seem as though there's been a response to the surges really. Like there's the stay-at-home orders haven't really continued. They may have frozen into whatever state or phase that they were in at the time. And we definitely see a dramatic difference in the way that the governors are responding vis-a-vis Texas governor versus Florida's governor. But even within that, it's not really resuming back to stay at home. I mean, and I'm wondering if stay at home or shelter at home will even help us at this point.
I think they're gonna. So I think they're going to have to shelter in place. I think they're going to have to do another shelter in place order. So there's a map of the United States which shows, roughly about 20 of the states have sort of halted any more reopening, which won't do that much for the infection. And then a couple of states, specifically the ones we've been talking about, Florida, I think it was Florida, Texas, and California, I've started to reverse. Have started to, well, we opened up restaurants, now we're going to close restaurants. We opened up bars, now we're going to close bars. What I'm seeing, though, is that I think that at least Texas and Florida are going to have to do a shelter-in-place order. And they're going to have to do a shelter-in-place order and really get a handle of things. One of the things that's happening is, in addition to no ICU beds, no ventilators, and no PPE, the other issue, which no one is talking about, which is going to be their most critical issue, is staffing, right? You can't run your nurses and your docs at 7 days a week for a year. Do you know what I mean? And so that is going to be the real issue.
Yep. Did we lose you?
Nope, I'm here. I'm just trying to shoosh my dog away.
Okay, got it. I just picked mine up. Okay, so thank you for that. So the question becomes, do you think schools will completely shut down again?
So if the governors, so if I were a governor, I would do my shelter in place order now, so that maybe I could get my infection rate down enough so that by August or September, I could open school. You see what I'm saying? Because see, once you do a shelter in place order, once September comes and you haven't done that, it makes it even harder to do it because it will impact schools. So the time to do a shelter in place order is now during the summer break. So I think you will see some governors recognize that and do a shelter in place order before, school opens. On the East Coast, school opens, right after Labor Day. In some of these southern states, they normally open up around the middle of August. So, they would need to do a shelter in place order in the next week or two so that they can have a full month to kind of get it together.
Okay. Joe Vic is listening with my kids, and my 8-year-old daughter would like your thoughts on why some people won't wear masks.
Oh, I know. Well, one is, so we had this, I had a slide on about the personality traits of the sort of person who doesn't wear a mask. And they're sort of Machiavellian or narcissist. I think it's very selfish and it's also very careless. Just as an example, if 95% of us wore an N95 mask for a month, we would have this virus handled. So it's literally like we just won't do the work to do it, right? And so the other thing I think is, and this is what I would tell his daughter, is nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. Everybody's like, well, that's going to happen to somebody else. So the main thing that I have found that I've been shocked when I work in the emergency department and I tell a patient that they have COVID-19 and they have tested positive and they didn't know it before, they are all so shocked. I mean, they're like, what? You've got to be kidding me. How did I get that? And I'm sitting here, and I'm often thinking, okay, there's like 2 million people in the United States that have COVID-19. I mean, this is not a rare disease, right? What'd you say?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean
Yeah. So I think that some of it is like, this happens to other people. This doesn't happen to me. And people get really, really shocked and they get careless. And they're selfish.
I don't know if they're doing like a certain, he told me that they were doing.
As they look, so this is another elevator question. As they look at elevator situations, what is said regarding airflow functions through apartment building complexes and quote unquote the projects?
Yeah. So this is why I was saying that the airborne issue is going to be a real issue. One of the things is that you've got to really, as soon as it becomes airborne, you've got to look at ventilation systems in public housing. You've got to look at having HEPA filters. You've got to look at having a filtration system that really makes a difference and cleanses the air. I'm actually telling people, if you live in a building with a lot of other people, the best thing you can do is actually open up your windows and keep your windows open, right? And that is the absolute best thing that you can do. The other thing that you can do is any sort of UV light or any sort of UV light in your apartment or apartment complex. But that is, you know, I did an op-ed recently on prisons, and I'm going to be speaking on that. And prisons and public housing both have the same issue around ventilation.
Well, we have a lot of thank yous and especially awesome answers for the 8-year-old.
Okay.
Hopefully she can help be part of the positive promotion of mask wearing. It's amazing
Yes.
how that seems to be such a simple thing, it sounds like, and such a hard thing.
Such a simple thing and such a hard thing. Well, you know, I tell people, if you don't want to wear a mask, go out at 6 o'clock in the morning when nobody else is out. That's what I do. I go out early in the morning. Like if I want to exercise and, you know, exercise and not have on a mask, I go out, you know, 6 o'clock in the morning when nobody's out, you know, but once it's 9:30, 10 o'clock and folks are all over the place, you got to have a mask.
All right, next question. Is it safe to be in a pool?
Yeah, so you know what? I've gotten this question a lot. And I have not reached a conclusion. It does appear that chlorination may actually break up the fatty covering of COVID-19. And so clearly I can say a chlorinated pool is much better than a lake or a pond. But I have not ventured out to a pool yet because I haven't seen the conclusive information on pools. But I would definitely say that they're safer than, I'd go to a pool before I'd go to an outdoor pool before I'd go to an indoor gym.
That's good information.
Yeah.
That's the break.
Right.
I wanted to share my airplane experience last week.
Oh yes, please do.
Because I had the opportunity to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, of course, I've been watching and paying attention on all of these things.
Right.
And the person that I was with accidentally, I actually had ordered a Tyvek, and I was packing and moving out of my apartment, and the person packed all my Tyvek suits. I thought I had packed them in one bag, and
okay.
Long story short, I didn't have one. So I dressed in layers. I
Okay.
had one layer of clothing, and then I had a second layer on top. I had the summer layer and the spring layer.
Okay. So wait. Just so for any of those that are new with us, the Tieback suit is a hazmat suit, and it has booties and it covers all of your arms and legs and chest, and then it also has a hoodie. Some of them come also with a hoodie, but it completely covers your clothes. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I wore leggings and then loose pants over my leggings.
Okay.
Socks, 2 pairs of socks, and
okay.
Like Crocs. I wore a t-shirt, and then I wore a long sleeve t-shirt over it, gloves, and my mask, and a hat.
Okay.
So that was my bootleg outer
Okay,
clothes.
all right. And what kind of mask did you wear?
N95.
You had an N95. Okay, good.
I researched the airlines based on some of the things that you said, and narrowed it. And also I made the decision that if I was going to fly, I needed to fly direct because I was concerned about airports. I didn't want to be in any more airports than necessary, and I didn't want to be on any more planes than necessary.
Right.
So I did that. So I flew that limited my options, by the way, because although the airlines are flying, there's not nearly as many planes. So I did a comparison. I narrowed it down to 2 airlines, which were Delta and Southwest. I ultimately went with Southwest because I went online and looked at the reviews that people were giving the airlines related to COVID, and people were saying better and more positive things about Southwest.
Okay.
And I would say, not that they were saying necessarily negative, but some of the comments made me feel more comfortable.
Okay.
So that's how I ultimately made the decision to fly Southwest.
Okay.
What I then did was, when I got on the plane, they first of all, at the airport, I was a little disappointed. I flew out of Baltimore, BWI. There was not a great deal of social distancing once you got through security.
Okay.
So in terms of when you sat in chairs, people pretty much sat wherever they wanted to. However, there did seem to be a high social pressure to keep your mask on.
Okay. In the airport.
In the airport.
Okay.
Getting on, but I will say, before you got through security, there was a lot of social distancing. There was a lot of attention paid. But once you got through security, you were kind of like on your own.
Okay.
I can also report that while the shops were not open, the food places were open, and everybody had on masks and gloves.
Okay.
And they also social distanced around the food places, but I think that was by the individual food people.
Okay.
Getting on the plane, they social distanced as we were getting on the plane. They made us stand, and they boarded us very slowly in groups of 10 and made us social distance. They also monitored how we sat so that families could sit together, but everyone else had to have at least a seat apart from each other.
Okay.
And throughout the flight, although they did provide they did provide water to people who wanted it. That was pretty much it, that water. And they would allow you to drink the water, but other than drinking the water, they pretty much monitored you in terms of your mask. Like they walked through the cabin several times, and if they noticed you didn't have a mask on and you weren't drinking water, they would ask you to please put your mask on.
Okay. Okay.
And then the flight attendants themselves, there were less flight attendants, which I only know because my aunt used to be actually I have two relatives that are flight attendants. So I know normally there's three, there was only two. And they social distanced.
Okay.
So
and they had on masks?
And they all had on masks, yes, which they never took off.
Okay.
And the pilot had on mask.
Okay.
I don't know if he kept it on, but I felt very as safe as possible. The other thing is they did explain the fact that there was help with filtration.
Oh, okay.
And there also, I noticed Southwest, because I fly them a lot, tends to like, as soon as you get off the plane, you're getting on the plane. There was none of that. There was a full, probably 45 minutes to an hour between the plane landing and then us being allowed to get on the plane.
Okay.
And cleaning. Yeah. And you could see the guys in their suits with their cleaning products headed down to clean the plane.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, and they were not always cleaning the plane in between flights.
No, that's why it was such a quick turnaround, because they would just do the seat belts and pick up the trash and then put you back on. That does not happen anymore.
Right. Okay. All right.
At least that was my experience. So I thought I would share that. Good. And we have a few more questions. Okay. One is, so we talked about pools, we talked about lakes. What about oceans?
No. No.
Our coastal people are looking for a loophole.
No. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about lakes and oceans and anything like that. You know, a lot of our sewage is treated and then put back into the waters, our natural waters, right? And so with that retreatment, we have not seen that they're retreating to the point where there's no COVID in the water, in the sewage water. So when you see, there was an oceanographer who actually did a video, I think she was on YouTube or something, and she was actually talking about how, you know, someone really needs to take a look at, you know, the waves coming in and how much COVID is actually in the waters. and it's particularly with the waves and how it sort of, the mist comes up after the waves come in and hit upon the shore. And so, no, if you're going to do any sort of water sport, it would need to be in a chlorinated pool. Nothing that's an ocean or a pond or a lake.
Okay. And we get these mask questions a lot. So here's another one. What's the difference between the N95 and the KN95 mask?
Nothing. Yeah, so yeah, it's nothing really. The KN95 mask was really made for community use. It didn't necessarily go through the whole FDA approval process, but in other countries, they use the N95 and the KN95 mask interchangeably. It's just that we didn't actually take the KN95 through the FDA process. So the only real difference is that when I wear an N95 mask in the emergency department, I've been fit tested for that specific type of N95 mask. So there's different types of N95 masks. They have other numbers after them. So they're N95 1850, N95 1870, N95 1870 plus. So I've been fit tested for my particular N95 mask. When you get an N95 mask, you haven't been fit tested for it, so you're just assuming which one actually works the best for you. So I tell people, try to make sure that, you shouldn't be able to smell anything when you have it on. So an N95 mask that has not been fit tested is still going to work better than, a cloth mask or a surgical mask, but it's not going to be it's not going to block out exactly 95% of the particles unless it's actually been fit tested. But it might do 85 or 90, which is still much, much better than a mask that you made at home.
Okay. Here's an airport question. He says, thank you. You're welcome.
Okay.
In the airport TSA security checks, what, if anything, is different about the inspection process now compared to the pre-COVID times? Also, is there anything different about the way luggage is being handled? The main thing different on TSA is not the inspection process. And I must admit, I'm clear, I'm pre-checked, I skip all the lines, I go right to the front, so I don't know how the regular people are doing it. But I will say that I did observe TSA monitoring and asking people to social distance in Baltimore. They did not let you crowd up on each other when you were going to put your bags through the thing. And they were very conscientious about sort of distance and that kind of thing. There also was a lot less touching. I noticed they did a lot fewer screens. So unless you beeped, I did not observe any random screens, which normally I see at least one or two. And as far as luggage was pretty much the same. There was really no difference with luggage. They did not ask people to remove masks in security either. Only briefly to affirm identity. But again, I have clear, so I didn't have to remove my mask because I was fingerprint tested.
So because some people's masks have that metal thing right at the nose bridge. Did you see, was the machines, were any of the masks making the machines go off?
If the machine went off, they would hand scan you when you came out.
Okay.
They didn't touch you, but there was no touching.
There was no touching. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, now lots of questions. Based on your answer of not getting in the ocean, do you think this is why COVID is spreading so quickly at the beaches?
Yeah, no, it really could be. Yeah, and that would make sense for Texas, Florida, Alabama, California. Yeah, it definitely could be. I think that when people say it's hard to social distance at a beach, what I noticed, even though there were a lot of people at the beach, it did seem like people were kind of sitting amongst the people that they came with. I didn't see any masks. So again, as soon as you have waves crashing in, you have droplets becoming aerosolized and you have no mask. And so I think that that's probably the biggest problem. And then obviously getting in the water. So yeah, I think that's all. I think that's all going to be very, very problematic, and we're going to see another wave in September when people, try to get their last little beach time in.
Absolutely. Please talk about the Tyvek and or hazmat suit. What exactly is it? How do you get one? What's the best time to use one?
Yeah, so you get those. You get those also on eBay. I get them on eBay. I buy mine on eBay. They are white. They zip up. So when you see people on the news that are working in the ICU, they have this white thing on that that zips up, and everybody seems to be wearing this white thing. That is the Tyvek suit. What it is basically so that you don't get any, if you get any droplets or anything on your clothing. One of the ways that people transmit it is they go home and then they hug a pet or they hug a family member. So you can just take that outer layer off, and then your clothes underneath are not contaminated. So that's the purpose of a Tyvek suit. So we had talked earlier in some of the webinars about how to fly. And one of the things that I recommended was that you use a Tyvek suit, because it's very hard when you're flying not to, you're going to be sitting in a public chair or bench or seat before you actually board the plane. If you go sit down and you go eat someplace, you're going to be sitting in a chair on the plane. You're going to be leaning up against you'll have a, what is the thing that comes from the back of the plane, like the little plate area where you're kind of, the ledge kind of like, so you're going to have all these, you're going to be touching all these things that other people will have touched, right? So you want to have a Tyvek suit, preferably if you're going to fly. This was for flying, right? Preferably with the booties and the hood to cover your hair, gloves, and either an N100 mask, which is a silicone mask that blocks out 100% of the particles, or an N95 mask. So that was the recommendation for actually flying. When else would you need one? Let's see here. I think as long as you don't go to the church or go to the gym or go to the office, and you're not working in a hospital setting, I wear one when I work in a hospital setting, or sometimes a hospital will give me scrubs, and then at the end of the day, I can take those scrubs off before I go into my home. But you really don't need one in any other setting that I can think of, unless you're going to be someplace where, you're going to be sitting and touching things that are public and frequently used. So that is the Tyvek suit and the N100.
Yep.
And the N95 mask.
Yes. And I did take all of my outer layer out. I had a plastic bag and put them all in a plastic bag once I left the airport before I got in my friend's car.
Right. So that's why she was saying that she mispacked her Tyvek suit. So instead she wore 2 layers of clothes and took the outer layer off. Yeah. Right. And then you just throw that in the washing machine, and then it's fine to use again. Right.
I put it in a plastic bag, and I had a plastic bag, and when I got out of the airport, took off the top layer, shoes, socks, put it in a plastic bag, and then washed it when I got to the house.
Yeah, exactly.
As a commercial customer, how do you get an N95 mask fit tested?
I don't know if anybody's actually doing, that's interesting. I don't know of anybody who's actually doing fit testing. What we did on this webinar was we actually went through how you fit test your N100 mask. And we also went through different things you can try, so you can actually see how good your mask actually is. So one of the things that we actually did, and we could do this again on another webinar, but one of the things, yeah, I will ask that. Okay, one of the things that we did was, you can take, let's say you have 3 different types of mask at home, right? You buy 3 different types. You want to know which one works the best. You can get some perfume, you can get some off spray, put one mask on, spray in front of you, and see how much you can actually breathe in and actually smell, because that's what fit testing is. And you do that with all 3 masks. And you want to make sure to crunch the nose part and make sure that it's all the way covered underneath your chin, right? and you actually do that with each of the masks, and you will tell a difference between how they actually fit. You'll actually be surprised how much you can actually tell the difference between how the different mask fits. And then once you know the one that actually you can't smell anything, you can't blow out a candle, that's the one for you, and then get that size over and over again. Somebody asked me if the Tyvek suit is to be thrown away. Yes. So a Tyvek suit it's about maybe $20, anywhere from $15 to $20. How much did you pay for yours, Holly?
I bought a pack of 6, and I think I paid $40.
Okay, all right. So that's what I said. They're about $10 to $15 in general, and yeah, you throw them away.
Yeah.
You throw them away, and you're done with them after that one use. That's the great thing about them. But you have a lot of people who transmit this disease on their clothes and particularly on their shoes. But their shoes, their clothes, their hair. So yeah, that's what the Tyvek suit is for. You can actually kind of cover up, then take it off and throw it away.
And let's see, our last question as we hit the 9 o'clock hour. What are the best types of gloves to use, latex or something else?
So gloves, you can really use almost any sort of glove. The issue that I say with people is that you just really need to know, like, if you have a latex allergy, then you don't necessarily want to use latex gloves. I use the blue nitrile gloves because I have a latex allergy, but any sort of glove that is, plastic and covers will actually sort of work. There's not as much of a difference between the gloves.
We are almost at the 9 o'clock hour, but we have a hand raised. Can we do that one real fast?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Let me see if we can get. Oh, I don't have it. I don't have host position.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All righty.
Well, you can let them. There
Kevin. You can unmute Kevin.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome, everybody. Listen, my neighbor is piling up her shoes, 10, 12 pair at a time. And yes.
Wait. We can't quite hear you. Your neighbor is doing what?
Hold on. I think I need to take this off of. Hold on one second.
So he's got a complaint about his neighbor doing something. So let's. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. My neighbor is piling up all her shoes outside the door, and 10, 12 pair at a time. And yes, the hospital clogs are amongst them.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that I need to address?
Yeah. Okay. So you live in an apartment complex, right? You share a common hallway, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put you back on mute for just a second. So yeah, so that is most likely your neighbor not wanting to bring her shoes into the house, right? And so, so one thing is that the shoes in the hallway would really only cause a problem like if you were walking where her shoes are. But if, let's say she has COVID-19 on her shoes, COVID-19 sitting on her shoes that are sitting in the hallway, or COVID is not it can't jump off the shoe. Like it's not a mobile virus. It's not a mobile organism, right? So, now you could ask her, hey, could you put a box out, front, or, could you do something along that line? But in general, the virus isn't mobile and won't, if it's on her shoe, it's on her shoe, but it's not going to actually go into the air from the shoe. Where people get in trouble with the shoes is when they actually have COVID-19 from the hospital or something on their shoes, and they're walking into their home, and then maybe they sit on the floor and watch TV, or their dog is on the floor and then the dog gets up on their lap. It's that sort of a transmission that actually causes a problem. But as long as you're not touching your shoes or in any way interfacing with your shoes, then it's not going to cause a problem.
All right.
Good question.
Yep, and I think that brings us right up to our 9 o'clock hour. So
All righty. Well, we had a lot this week.
yeah, we had
We had a lot.
there
And I
was
didn't even,
so much happening.
I know. I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen between now and Tuesday? I mean, now and Thursday, right?
Thursday, and that's a great way to end. So we will definitely be back on Thursday
Okay.
at 8 p.m. Eastern to have this conversation again and provide you with the latest updates. And just want to always thank you, Dr. V, for always being attentive and deliberate in the information that you give, because Lord knows we need it when we're hearing so many different things as we try to be navigating this crazy.
Yes. And invite those non-mask wearing people onto this webinar.
Yes, that'll be
Okay.
for Thursday. That's a good one.
All right. Talk to you later then.
All right. Bye.
All right, bye.